Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
We're back doing this again.
Yeah.
And, we oftentimes bring in people that are friends of ours and that are in a lot of the spaces. And I love how I feel like most of these have always started out with me just completely ignoring our guest for the first 30 seconds to a minute, totally pretending that they're not sitting right next to me inches away, but I love to do that. And we've got somebody in today. Who do we have in today?
We've got Chris Shannon with us today.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Chris.
Hello, Elliot. How are you?
Did you just show up? What happened? How did this?
I've been here a while.
You think I would learn at this point, It's not like we organized this and met you outside and had a whole conversation about snacks and stuff, whatever. But now that we've officially brought you into the studio, who are you, man? Tell us about you. What do you do? What's your life? Yeah, okay. Hey, that's good too. Yeah.
Journey of 1,000 steps.
You're right.
Whatever. No, Chris Shannon. Let's see. By day, I am a vice president of enterprise data management at a healthcare technology company. By night, I play a lot of Fortnite.
Nice.
Father of two wonderful kids. I've lived in Nashville since 1993, over half my life. I consider myself sort of a grandfathered in native
for sure.
at this point.
Yeah.
Let's see. Wow. I play drums as a hobby.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where I am right now.
You're active in a good couple of secular and non-religious communities.
I've been active in the secular community in various capacities now for probably 10 years.
Wow.
Primarily as I played drums, and I haven't done it so much of late, but I played drums in the unnamed assembly band with Sunday Assembly Nashville now for really probably about 10 years. I think going back to 2014 or so was when I started doing that. I played drums in a praise band at Brentwood United Methodist Church before that. That was where a fair amount of my deconversion happened. It was a very, very interesting...
Behind that drum set, yeah.
But here's the best part about it, right, it was behind the drum set, behind the pulpit. And so in between the band playing, some of the band would go off and sit in pews, but because of that, I sat in a chair back up behind the pulpit. And so as time was going on and I was going through some of my deconversion, it was like I'm sitting back up behind the pulpit going, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be back.
Just looking dejected on your face, everybody in the congregation staring.
I was trying to kind of hunch down as much as possible, hoping that people could see me up there going, no.
Did you ever feel tempted as the drummer, when the pastor said something really outrageous? Did you ever feel tempted to give me
there was some of that, right? But then it was I sat in a chair sort of back, so we could have had the drum set here. It was really kind of interesting because of how there was kind of a big deal in that church about having the drum set. Back there to begin with.
Oh, sure.
Really?
Right. And so,
in a lot of churches it was sacrilegious.
Yeah.
Especially if they had choir robes and hymns and that, and an organ, and
you getting a little bit like that rock music, that.
Yeah, they
straight up
was interesting. They started us out in sort of this side chapel, and it got really big. Right, we were having 800 people or more, coming to do that, and we just got to the point where we didn't fit in that chapel. So they had this whole thing where we're going to put you in the big chapel. I don't know if you're familiar with Brentwood United, but it's one of those big Brentwood churches, right? And so there was a lot of sort of push and pull around fitting our alternative service in that. And there were some of the money people that pushed back on the idea of having drums in that. And I'm glad, because I heard about that. I was in one of those church meetings, and I was kind of glad I wasn't in that meeting, because I probably would have pissed a lot of people.
Right.
So, but yeah.
So you said you went through a lot of your deconstruction there. How long ago was that?
That would have been, let's see, sort of between probably 2009 and 2011.
So a while.
2012.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we want to launch into sort of my deconstruction, it was really kind of interesting because I was born and raised Southern Baptist, Fort Smith, Arkansas, and avid reader of Greek mythology. And so it's funny because my sort of deconstruction it happened in sort of waves throughout my life and kind of cycles and things like that, where I would be close, I would step away, or I would, what's the word? Renew, re-up, rededicate myself to Christianity. I mean, we were the Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, and then everything I did with the youth group, so a good 40% of my everyday life came back to that church in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Sure.
Things that I did. But really kind of the triggering point for me and kind of a lot of that as I was growing up was sort of this love of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Right. As I read it and I loved the stories and things like that. And then as sort of time went on, I kind of start to ask myself questions about, people believed this at sort of one point, right? This was religion to them. The gods were real to them in the way that, the God of the Bible, the Christian belief was to me. I went to this summer program after my junior year of high school, the Arkansas Governor's School. And one of the most interesting things about that, what they try to do is like a 6-week program over the summer for quote unquote gifted and talented people. Somehow or another I got in. I don't know. But one of the key sort of things coming out of that was sort of they're teaching us to look at both sides of an issue, or all sides of it. Consider perspectives other than your own, right? And so I really kind of came away from that with a number of questions and thoughts, kind of, just again, a couple more inches chipped away, a couple of slivers off the block of what I thought or what I believed. But kind of all those questions sort of lodge and they continue to sort of take root. And then and as I go on and I it was one day, probably in 28 or 29, I was in McKay's bookstore and I came across this book. It was Atheism, The Case Against God. I'm not a big philosophy reader or anything like that. I tend to read for escape, right? Putting all my energy in work and things that I study for there. So if I'm reading, if I'm reading, it's usually to escape. It's usually for entertainment, right?
Yeah.
So I picked up this book, and I'm reading through it, it really over time it really presents this case. How do we know what we know, right? What's the source of knowledge? And things like that. And kind of as I went through that book, it really started to sort of to coalesce all these different thoughts and questions that I had as I was growing up, to where it got to the point where I kind of just, I don't know if I want to say that I woke up one day, but I was, thinking about it to myself one day, and I realized, oh, this is what I am. No, I'm an atheist. I don't believe.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's, and it was interesting because it was always you go through this phase where you're like, God, I don't believe you. But then you're like, God, if I don't believe him, why am I talking to him?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
And then, as I was going through this and these thoughts start to solidify in my mind, and I start to think about these things and put two and two together, for me. And I just got this point where I was like, okay, there's a gap. There's not a gap, not a right word, but it's kind of locked in my mind that it's not I don't believe in you anymore. To just I just don't believe. Right. It's funny though, as time has sort of gone on and thinking about the conversation coalition conversation, we're talking about evidence for God and things like that. And this idea that, well, maybe there's a creator, there's a God, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the idea that it's a Christian God.
Totally.
What I've sort of, as I've looked at things, sort of studied things, I'm an avid reader of stories, things like that. What I kind of realize is mankind's pretty good at creating gods.
Right.
Right. We do a pretty good job of that. I stumbled across this thing. It was like the religion world tree.
Yeah.
If you guys have never seen it, it's
Gary's-
a fantastic,
Oh, yeah.
Just talking about it 30 minutes ago.
beautiful, beautiful thing. And as I'm looking at that, like that kind of sort of sums up sort of where I kind of landed on this is like for me there just because Christianity and Islam and some of the other religions have done a really good job and developed staying power, which I firmly believe is because of community, right? That has sort of solidified the staying power. It doesn't necessarily lead to the idea that it's valid in terms of the way it presents God.
Right.
And so I'm like, I don't see enough that makes me think this one religion is better than that other religion, that it's necessarily true.
Right. And when you look at that family tree
Yeah.
of religions and realize that each of them think that they have the true
Sure.
religion, it changes your perspective. And well, I happen to have brought up in this one right here, but all of us think that we have the true.
Yeah, when there's kind of I don't know if leap is the right word or if it's you step into, and I think back to that governor's school thing that I was talking about, where we're coming out of that. I had hit a point where I looked at things from sort of different sides, and you challenge your own assumptions. And I think that's kind of a struggle, sort of in our country and sort of Christianity today, where people aren't willing to sort of challenge their own assumption, where they don't.
Yeah.
You got to be able to kind of ask yourself, why is this really different from all the other things?
Right.
Why is my religion the right one versus all the other ones? and why is it that this was the one you were born into? How fortunate are you? Hashtag blessed.
What an interesting coincidence that you just happen to be gifted the right
that's just
worldview.
great.
Yeah.
For you. Fuck all the other people on the planet, though.
Right. Right.
But it sounds very much like there was this emotional community piece of it that was
Absolutely.
keeping you there.
Yeah.
But this idea of whether or not this story is true,
Yeah.
that really mattered to you.
So here was kind of the part of the struggle for me, right? Because we go back and talk about being in that Brentwood praise band, right? To me, there is sort of, you get into sort of the question of spirituality, right? And how we think about things like that. And to me, there's something about art. There's something about music, especially. And there were things that, as I'm sort of thinking and as I'm setting back up behind that, that pulpit, listening to the preacher talk, and I think, and I'm sitting there and I'm struggling with this idea that this is not who I am anymore. It's not even so much to me a question of, do I believe this? Do I not believe this? What do I think? What do I do? As much as just, this is not who I am.
Right.
Right. I had, but what was hard to walk away from was how much I loved making that music.
Yeah.
Because there were times, and Elliot, I know you and I have talked a little bit about this before. There were times on that stage. We had this guy that would come in and play acoustic guitar with us. That was just fantastic guy. He'd played with Glenn Campbell, right?
Oh,
This
yeah.
guy was like a top-notch guitar player. And there are times we'd be playing songs and you just feel locked in. Like what is it? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? And there'd be times we'd be doing stuff. And this guy who was like right in front of me, when he would turn around and he'd look at me and he'd just like give me this nod.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, this is, I don't know what to call this if not sort of spiritual, right? I don't know what to call this if it's not like this human thing where we're shared making something. And I was like, I don't want to give that up. But I also feel like there's some intellectual dishonesty, right? Because people assume if I'm up there doing that, I'm doing these things, that I am representing something. We are singing songs about that. And so it was kind of a challenge for me when I got to this point where I was just like, I don't think I can do this. And it was funny because in walking away from that, I felt like in part I was actually walking away from the ability to play music with other people.
Oh wow.
Right. That it was kind of like, okay, I'm giving up. I'm not only sort of giving up this, but I probably, it's kind of, I mean, we live in Nashville, right? There are musicians. You throw a rock,
sure.
you hit it, and not just like a musician, right? But like really good. So I kind of felt like at the time I would have said, wow, this is really God giving me an opportunity. That Brentwood United called me up and said, we're putting together this praise band. We heard you play drums. And I'm like you got down the list to me in Nashville, right? There wasn't anybody else, right? And so I felt like, ooh, I like snuck in and took the throne from like somewhere out there's like a real musician, right? There's a real, and some of the other people in the band had like been touring musicians or had done their own albums or stuff like that. And so I kind of felt like, how did like Brentwood United, it's a big church. I mean, how did they get out of me? Was there nobody? Like, how people did you go through before you got to me? Right. Right. And so I felt when I made the decision to I've got to walk away from that. I thought that happens once.
Yeah. You may not get that opportunity.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I mean, what kind of things are going to align for that to happen to me again? Well, flash forward from that, I go through my divorce a few years later, and I meet a couple people from Sunday Assembly, and I'm talking to them, and we're doing things like that, and they say something about music, and I said, so yeah, well, I play drums, and they're like, we need to go talk to this guy, right? Because Sunday Assembly is looking for a guy that can play drums, and so, boom, lightning strikes twice.
That's crazy,
right? And so that was kind of my hook. I'd been looking for that social thing. I've been looking for that sort of sense of community because, take away whatever, this sort of the religious aspect, the community aspect of being a church is a very powerful thing. I had gone through a divorce, right? And I found myself, we had separated, it was amicable divorce. So it's not like my life was, I was so distraught or like that, but I found myself sort of sitting there thinking, okay, what do I do now? The way things had gone, most of our social life had been wrapped up in her friends.
Right.
And so I'm kind of rebuilding a bit. And I thought, it would be so easy for me to go to find a big church with a big singles group. And I could sit in there and within a month, could probably have a big group of friends. I could be happy, maybe have a dating pool kind of. And that, oh God, that called to the comfort. That's sort of how easy to kind of step back into something like that. And I thought, but I would feel like I'm lying.
Right.
I would feel like my being there was proclaiming something about myself. It just wasn't. And I didn't think that I could lead somebody on or let them,
right.
And so I kind of resisted that, and sort of getting connected into sort of Sunday Assembly and through the band was okay. So here's the thing that I could do where I'm not having to do rehearsals. I don't have to play every weekend. The expectations, it sits right in that sweet spot, which is where the praise band with Brentwood United settled in. And sort of just to be clear too, everybody in Brentwood United was great.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. I love those people today.
Right.
I don't think I ever talked to them. I don't any of them know that I'm an atheist now. That wasn't part of any conversation I had with them. But, but getting hooked into Sunday Assembly in Nashville and getting to do that, I've gotten to do some cool stuff with that. Went to Washington, D.C. and did some stuff there. We played for a conference in Atlanta. We went to San Diego, and played at the Sunday Assembly has an international conference every year.
Yeah.
So the Nashville band kind of take part in that. And so I've gotten to do some cool stuff with that.
Right.
That I, probably didn't think I would ever have to be able to do. So that kind of built a sense of community.
Man, okay. I don't know about you. I've got like 30 different things already swirling around in my head. So just at any point, just be like, hey, shut up. It's my turn. That discussion about how important community is for you now and how entrenched you were in it, when you were religious.
Yeah.
When you were in that kind of transition period, what was that like, kind of navigating, leaving one community, going to the other? Did that religious community just like drop off completely? Or was it like, well, we hung out a little bit less for a few years and then eventually?
So for me, it was I cut it off. Right.
Okay.
So one of the interesting impacts of doing the band was that because of where the timing of that service was, I had to disconnect from my Sunday school group, which is where where most of sort of the community interaction with other people.
Yeah.
Because it just, it could be both places
Right.
at once, right? So some of that connectivity dropped off because I prioritized playing in the band. When I thought about it and with where I was and what I was doing, I had kind of already started to drop off church-related things altogether. My wife and I had started having similar problems, so she dropped out of the church. Altogether at that point. She was never religious in that way. I don't know that she ever felt that she would probably call herself a Christian. We had made a decision as a family that we wanted to get back in church, but that actually was driven by community rather than sort of Christianity per se. So her kind of backing out. And so it was, by that point in time, it was mostly just me going and playing in the band. And so when I made the decision to drop out of it, I actually had been giving thought about going back to school, trying to go get a master's degree, things like that. And so I actually couched it in terms to the band of, these are things I'm deciding to pursue, which is going to take more time than I have. And so, it's kind of just heavy heart. I'm going to walk away from this. And so it wasn't like there was hey, it just sort of fizzled. It wasn't sort of there wasn't any.
They didn't kick you out.
No, they didn't kick me out or anything like that. But for me, it was sort of, okay, if I'm not doing this, there's really not much I'm going to be doing in the church anyway. And given sort of what I've come to sort of learn about myself, this is not really where I fit anyway. Right. And so, that loss was sort of a little more self-imposed. And then I had, so I started going through the divorce and the separation and some things that, at work that took most of my time. And with the divorce, the thing that my ex-wife and I agreed on fully was that we're going to do this co-parenting thing. The kids come first. So every decision about the kids. So I spent most of my energy at that point in time between, what I was doing at work and making sure that I was, being there for my kids, right? That I was getting into that. So for a while there, I didn't miss the community because I was so focused on other things.
Sure.
Right. But kind of as time goes on and you start to think, I need to get plugged in, right? I need, here's sort of an interesting, and this is, I think, a part of struggle that a lot of us as sort of adults feel today, especially in a big distributed sort of population like what we have today. I do not think of myself as lacking for friends, right? I have friends here in Nashville that I have been friends with for half my life, right? Guys that I know I can call at a moment's notice, and I'll be there for them. They'll be there for me, right? I have at least two guys like that I consider my best friends here in Nashville that go way back to before I was married, right? Back to, we're talking late 90s.
So they've done some life with you.
Oh, we've done a lot of life together with this. One of them I became friends with. Side story here. One of the guys that's my best friend is, I was in Brentwood Baptist Church, and one of the women came to me and said that, this guy had moved back into town. His mom was dying of cancer. Had been a long time. His family had been a long time members of the church, and she just wanted to see if I'd go and include him. Make him feel welcome. And so I did. Turns out to be one of my best friends.
Mm.
Right. And you know,
amazing.
even up through today, he and another friend of mine at the time, you know, they stood by me in my wedding, and things like that. And, you know, and I've got a couple friends from college and from other places too, but that live outside of Nashville. But so here's what I was sort of getting to, is this sort of idea of, I do not feel that I lack for friends.
Yeah.
Right.
And along the way, I'm starting to develop more friends and things like that. The challenge is they all live in different parts of Nashville, 30, 40 minutes away
Sure.
from everybody. They have families, they have kids.
Right.
Right.
And so I don't have that sort of social life at this point where I'm like, what's going on a Friday? And I can call up somebody on Friday at noon and say, what are we doing tonight?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's more like, hey, take a look at your calendar.
Uh-huh.
How soon do you think we can get together? Are you doing anything in, I don't know, it's May. What
Yeah.
does June look like for you?
Man, that's fascinating.
Right. And that's the challenge to me, I think, in general with social. Like, if you're not in a relationship, if you're not already sort of embedded in a group of friends like that, where, you know, you kind of, because that was the thing about being in the singles group, right?
Yeah.
I never thought about what I was doing. Like, what am I doing Friday night? Well, there'll be
Singles.
something going. Somebody's
Yeah.
going to play putt-putt,
For
or we're going to
sure.
watch a movie. You know, I had no lack of a social life.
Yeah.
Right.
Now it's like, and heaven forbid, if you don't plan, how funny is that, an atheist saying,
right.
heaven forbid, right? All right. Like, if you don't open that calendar and call somebody on Monday, you know,
You're not going to
you're
have
not
anything.
going to have anything on Friday.
That is really interesting, man.
Yeah.
I don't think I have ever had it laid out to me like that. I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever had this kind of thought right now that I just got from what you were saying. This idea that you have friends and family that are around you.
Yep.
You have connections.
Oh, yeah.
But is that the same thing as community?
That's exactly right.
That's
the
fascinating.
challenge. That's the sort of challenge to me, is that you know, my brother lives here in town too, right? You know, I don't, the loneliness sort of part of it is a situational sort of thing. Like, I've got stuff going on, you know, a lot, you know, or like I could go see my daughter play at concert at her college or things like that. So it's funny. What's interesting in part about it is how kind of the time flies between things, because you start to look at things and I think, oh, I got an event. And this conversation coalition thing that we're doing is great. And it's a social thing. Hey, you know, but it's once a month.
Yeah.
And that's kind of weird. You know, you get caught up in work and you get caught up in stuff like that. And then boom, a month's flown.
Right.
Right.
You know, and in between there, it's like, oh, what am I doing Friday? You know, I have these events that kind of like, it's sort of interesting, right? I've got a thing on Friday. I've got a thing tonight. You know, I had a thing Thursday. And so this is like the social weekend of the month,
boom,
right?
boom, boom, boom.
It's like all falls on the same 3 days. And I'm like, getting too old for this shit, right? Yeah. Good thing you guys don't want me to like drink and stay out till 2, right? You know? I mean, sleeping all day Sunday, right? But then the other days where I'm kind of like, oh, what am I, you know, oh, wow, what am I doing this weekend? I haven't really planned, you know, anything going on, right? I'm doing stuff around the house and stuff like that. And I do not mean this to be a woe is me sort of thing. I'm not, you know,
Yeah.
I consider myself generally a happy person, right? But it's kind of like, it is weird how the social dynamic changes. It's weird how the community aspect of thing changes, you know, as you get into that. Whereas, you know, if you're embedded in a church, like if you're going to that,
No question.
where you're going to be, oh, I know where I'm going to be on Saturday. And chances good there's probably some kind of potluck shit going on, you know, Saturday night.
Yeah.
You know,
Your social calendar is always filled out because there's somebody doing it for you essentially.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is get plugged in and involved.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of an interesting aspect, I think, to sort of the world we live in today.
For sure.
Right.
yeah.
And
So-
it is clear that, again, that distinction I have not laid out before for myself. And it says to me that there is such a need
Yeah.
for the secular community,
Yes.
because truly there is a difference between hanging out with secular people every so often, right?
Yeah.
Not being shunned and kicked out of the family, you know.
Right.
That is phenomenal. It
Yeah.
is necessary, but it is still not community. There is
Yeah.
still an extra layer that has to be there that we are just completely lacking on the non-religious side.
Yeah.
That is a really, really interesting thought, man. I've got another 40 things, but I'm never going to shut up. So what are you thinking, man? What do you got?
Well, I remember, so I've been getting to know Chris for over a year now, a year and a half or so. And I've just always been struck by his love for people and his vulnerability. And because he'll, you know, we like to swim in the deep waters and we like to get right in there and say, no, man, really, how are you doing? What are you struggling with? What's challenging you? Have you had any, great victories lately? Have you had any real hard things happen? Where, and we like to do that, and we like meeting other people that like to do that. And that's one of the things I've grown to love about Chris is that he'll be right there with you and show you exactly what's going on with him and what's important to him and what challenges you're having. And I love that about you.
Where-
So,
Thank you.
Where did that come from?
So it's funny because I was thinking back through this. I that governor school thing that I came out of, and the sort of the impression, like one of the things that I came out with it that I sort of really struggled with is communication, which has kind of been a big theme in my life, learning how people communicate, what it means to be an effective communicator with people. And I had this sort of idea in my head that it's like, we like to exist on a surface level. We don't like to go too deep. We don't like to be vulnerable and things like that. So when somebody says, "How are you doing?" What really do you want to know?
right.
Right. And I thought, my ex-wife used to have this thing that she would say, and I'm gonna butcher the quote of it, but it was basically, she kind of had this belief that there is nobody that you hate if you really know their story. Right. You really can't. It's hard in there. I think there's sort of truth to that. So that sort of summer program sort of put me on this journey of these themes in my life that I still continue to pull out and explore in terms of sort of how we communicate people, how we articulate things, where empathy sort of fits into that of knowing who or what or why, and so it's all been sort of part of the growth that I growth track that I guess I'm on personally sort of centers around a lot of that.
Yeah. I know as we're going through these things and as
Yeah.
we, went through our deconstruction on our own,
Yep.
it's a very personal
Yeah.
type of thing. But at the same time, we've got friends and family and loved ones around us. And we're growing, we're changing. And sometimes that can be difficult with the ones around us. So I'm curious, what was that like with people that love you, your kids, that kind of thing.
So my kids were never, my ex-wife was totally open to that because she wasn't so far in it herself, right?
One of these.
With my what now?
Oh, one of those.
I got to do that. Okay. I got that crazy wild hair going on. So, with my kids, I had this thing that I tried really hard to enact with the divorce. And Elliot, you and I were talking a little earlier before we turned things on and hit the flashy buttons, about sort of what your life was like a little bit as a result of your parents' divorce, right? I had this thing with my kids, and we did a 50-50 custody thing. A couple of rules I sort of realized and set for myself. One of them was I'm never going to badmouth their mother, right? I'm never going to do that because at some point in there, they know that they're part of her.
Yeah.
Right. The other part about it was just, I'm just going to try and talk. I'm just going to try and be real truthful with the kids and talk about things. And we're going to talk about things where, if things are rough, if things are challenging, we're going to set that up. We're going to talk about,
hey, this is the divorce. This is the reality of where we are. This is what we're going to try and do. This is how your mother and I are going to try and approach things. One of the key things I wanted to do with them was to be very careful about religion with them. I didn't want them necessarily to grow up to be, atheists or agnostics just because I was. Right. And so I talked with them about that, because as they started getting older, they started having run-ins with school.
Sure.
I can tell you pretty truthfully, my daughter doesn't have a whole lot of interest in Christianity because a lot of the kids she met that were Christian, that like acted, were jerks to her. Right. Sure. She saw sort of the downside of some of that, and it just wasn't of interest to her. My son's kind of a bit of a brainiac a bit, and he kind of approaches it, I think, from an ethical, philosophical sort of thing. My ex-wife tells me I had more influence on them than I think, and that's probably true. But what I told them was, I don't want you guys to think about, I don't want you guys to feel you got to be one thing or another. Until you get older, you hit the age of reason, you start making some decisions for yourself. When you guys get to be, in those teenage years, if you want to explore something, I'll be right there with you.
Right.
I'll go to church with you. We'll talk about it. We'll go through it. I'll support whatever you want to do. If you want to explore Buddhism, whatever. And my son goes, everything but Scientology. And I was like, what? And he goes, everything but Scientology, right? And I'm like, yeah, right. We're not doing that.
Please don't sue us, Church of Scientology. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Disclaimer. That's
so great. That's so good. Yeah, it was funny. I don't know what. Apparently, at some point in time, I had talked about it like as a cult or something like that, and that just stuck with him. And he was going, "Yeah, you'll take us to anything but that, right?" And I'm like, "Bingo."
How did they feel about knowing you in one capacity? In other words, Dad is the drummer at the church, and then now he's not.
Dad's the drummer at the atheist church.
Yeah.
It's funny with them because I don't know that they associated me. They were they were still kind of young, sort of at that point. This would have been, that would have all been before we divorced. So my daughter would have been in third through fifth grade.
Okay.
Third through fourth grade at that point. And Wesley's like 2 or 3 years behind that. So they were still young enough that me playing drums in the church wasn't attached to a religious thing. So it wasn't, Dad's a Christian, now he's not.
Yeah.
Because they had never, they hadn't ever got to the point where they're like, their identity is wrapped up with Christianity.
Right.
And at this point in time, my daughter had started having some of those experiences with people where, they're like, well, why aren't you a Christian? And she's like, I don't know what, why are you asking me this question?
Right.
And it was kind of interesting too, like in the time of the divorce, we were living in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and that place was well on its way to becoming the church on every corner.
Oh yeah.
Hi, who are you? What do you do? What church do you go to?
Yeah.
Sort of stuff. And so I'm kind of glad we got my kids out of that.
Yeah.
We ended up moving to Bellevue, and like within the first month of being at Bellevue, there was more diversity than we had ever seen in Spring Hill.
Right.
Right. So, yes, I'm a fan of DEI. Fuck off. So with my kids and this, there was never sort of a dichotomy, I think, with them, with religion. My deconstruction wasn't something that they necessarily were old enough to sort of understand or anything like that. And when it got to the point where we could talk about it, a little more, hey, I don't believe, here's why.
One thing we were talking about before we started recording, and I think this is a really interesting topic, especially kind of with what you were talking about earlier, that difference between having those connections and having the community and stuff. Secular dating, like it is this weird world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
First off, we'll just Gary's been out of the scene for a while. I'm very much just perpetually single, seems to be the case. So I'm very much in the scene. You weren't in it for a long time, in it now. So we've all got different perspectives on this. But I think one thing we can all agree on is that it's a little bit weird. It's a little odd.
Yeah.
And when you are in, that religious space, there is much more of a focus. There is much more of like that, because you are called to have this family, to bring the word of God to the next generation type thing. So what have been some of the challenges? What have been some of the benefits about being in that kind of secular dating space?
Well, yeah, I'm not very good at it. So let's not. You probably want to circle back and find an expert somewhere else. I think so. Partly there's a number of sort of things going on, certainly in society today, and sort of, and then within the secular space as well. So, like, let's start with a couple of what's the word I'm looking for? Assumptions, right, or things like that, right? It's a challenge, perhaps, to find a secular space.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. It's a challenge to build that community. Right. So going into that and understanding how hard it might be to find that kind of space, and then when somebody finds it, how important it may become to them. Like for me, as we think back over sort of like the Me Too movement, the things that we've learned about some of the challenges that women face, right? Just the simple things of walking to their car, getting in an elevator with a guy are vastly different experiences for me than they might be for a woman.
Yeah.
Right. And so as I've learned more about sort of the reality of those things, I really don't want to be that guy. I really don't want to be that guy that, like, through one action or inaction or another, or by making somebody uncomfortable, I don't want to fuck up that space that maybe they've been looking for.
Right.
I don't want to be the creepy guy.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to do that. Right. And so it's for me, it's kind of part of the question is finding people, sort of building the dating pool. Right. And part of it is sort of wanting to build the social circles where you can have people you can be friends with to start. Right.
Sure.
That's sort of a key part about it. And so, getting into a scenario where you're meeting people, you're getting to a point where you can build relationships, where you can, start to even sort of figure out if, hey, I know enough about you now, I'm interested in you, without having that be kind of, oh, you just tripped over from this person that it's cool to see once a month at the thing, to you're really creepy and I don't want to be, or
Sure.
you make me uncomfortable, or something like that. So it's I have always sort of tended to be a little more conservative and sort of doing that rather than being sort of forward in that. And so it's kind of interesting. It's challenging.
Yeah.
From that perspective. I don't. The online dating thing, every time I've thought about getting plugged into it, I hear horror stories.
Sure.
Right. I just, oh, it's horrible. It's this, it's that. And I'm like, okay, I've never been really good at being that upfront person. And we talked about this. I'd never really seen myself as the type of person that's in a bar that's going to be the person you see, like, I want to know that guy. I got to kind of, prove out my worth before. So it's interesting in sort of this scenario of trying to balance, I'd love to have a dating life, but I don't want to put sort of the sort of nascent community that I've been trying to build and the connections that I've been trying to build. Well, how do I balance the priority?
Yeah.
Right.
That's
in
tough.
that, right. And putting that at risk either for myself or for, for other people. I mean, we've known people that have, through one thing or another, have sort of lost access to parts of their community, and how devastating that can be.
Right.
So I don't want that for me, and I certainly don't want to be the cause of that for somebody else.
Right.
I don't know. There's a couple people out there that I'd burn if I could. I got a list.
Well, with that, I mean, is there something we can do broadly speaking, in the secular community to make that
I was going to say, like,
more-
for me, like, if you could go find.
Oh yeah, no,
eligible
sure,
women,
sure, sure. Yeah, I'll hit you up on that. Yeah, sure.
Set me up for that. That'd be great. No, my 70 virgins in heaven.
Yeah.
72.
72.
You can handle that for me. Oh, sweet. Okay. I didn't know that. That makes it. Wow. You have to
better.
reconsider this whole.
Yeah.
The only bad thing about 72 virgins is they also come with 72 mothers-in-law. So
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I saw
think about
I saw a
that.
meme the other day where a guy dies, goes to heaven, and meets a 72 virgin, and they're all like geek gamers.
Oh
with-
yeah.
Right, nerds,
Right.
you know. So so that's a good question. I think ultimately, sort of at the end of the day, we should just keep building what we're building, building a community,
yeah.
building opportunities for people to meet and get to know each other. I think it may take time, but I think things will grow out of that, right? Where you just build the opportunity for the connections. I think we were talking a little bit earlier, in the context of sort of just the social life, how like in churches today, it's Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. You've got things on the social calendar that it's some of those opportunities are more baked in. They've got hundreds and hundreds of years of sort of that type of community building, and we're trying to figure out how to do things once a month.
Yeah.
Right. Across different groups, and okay, where do I plug in, right? How do I do that? It's some of it's just, I think, just sort of growth and getting to a sort of stable level of community interaction where people feel more comfortable broaching those sort of things.
I think one thing that may be helpful, you asked what we can do.
Yeah.
Maybe not making the connections, not tying it to our worldview necessarily.
Oh.
Like, it's one thing to just talk about dating in general, but then when you
sure.
talk about dating in a religious context, it adds another layer of complexity to it. So maybe just not thinking about dating as far as dating in the secular world, and just talk about just in general.
What makes meaningful connections in relationships?
Right. Getting it now. I mean, this 2025 is an unusual time for various reasons, but in general, you're still just talking about getting to know a person, getting to know a wide number of people, determining which ones you're drawn to and would like to know more about, and then kind of moving into that space. Like, hey, you seem like an interesting person to me. You're somebody that I would like to, I'm kind of drawn to, and I'd like to know your story more. I'd like to know your experience more, and and just letting that happen naturally, and not necessarily focusing on the religious or secular or
It sounds a bit more. It sounds a bit more humanist than it is non-religious.
Right.
It's a bit more about that actual human to human thing.
Right. It's not. I've never heard anybody discuss say dating in the vegan community, or like
Sure.
How about
maybe there? I don't know. Yeah.
How about if you're a vegan and I'm not? I'm still curious about your story, and I'm still curious. We don't necessarily have to both be vegan, or have to both be religious, or have to both be secular, or have to. It just adds another layer of complexity to it. So I would say, in answer to your question of what we can do, is just meet more people.
Yeah.
Just and allow yourself to.
That kind of sounded like what you were saying is just genuinely grow that community, and these opportunities will come.
I think sort of normalizing relationships with differences.
Yes.
It is challenging. I mean, it is challenging in that, we think about, I was reading something the other day about how, the word of sort of the idea that we politicize things, has sort of crept into it. Like what we teach in school is, oh, you've politicized that, or listening to a certain type of music or doing certain things is like everything becomes political. Right. And so I think, one of the challenging things is sort of what level of differentiation in sort of thoughts or beliefs or worldviews am I willing to, what can I work with? And what's a showstopper?
Sure.
Right. To me. And Gary, I think you're sort of right on that about,
is there a way to kind of celebrate the differences? Is there a way to kind of work with them? It's, I remember being raised, don't be, don't be yoked unequally.
Unequally yoked,
Yeah, right.
Sure.
I wonder sort of for myself what, what's the line for me in terms of what's an absolute hard stop, right? And the thing I think I struggle with is that we have factions of people today that think about certain things as, well, this is a political view, or this is just a sort of religious view, where other people are like, yeah, what you're talking about impacts my life in a very critical life or death freedom sort of way. I'm not willing to write it off as just a political view. I'm not writing it off as, it's no longer a difference of opinion.
Sure.
Right. And so we begin to draw these sort of harder, entrenched lines on certain things where it's like, you may say it's an opinion, but it's a moral choice that somebody else is looking at. And that's, it's not easy. We tend to make things, this is like a thing I've been on in my life, really, like where it's like, I'm struggling with, I see it at work sometimes, I see it with other things, and where we tend to get in our own way. We just make things harder on ourselves rather than making things, it's like, it's harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
Right.
You're just like, why is this so effing hard?
You were talking about where to draw a hard line.
Yeah.
And you were telling us earlier about a dating situation with somebody in the secular community, and you found out that you guys weren't really that good of a match. You know, so you steered clear of that.
That's a polite way to put it.
And but I feel like I know you well enough now to know that if you met somebody and they were authentic, if they were kind to people, if they allowed themselves to be vulnerable, if they explored different ideas and other people's stories, and they weren't out to impose their worldview on someone else, even if that person said, I happen to be a faithful person, I happen to be a religious person, I don't think that would be a hard stop for you.
I don't know that it would. I think some of it would be tied to, are they constantly trying to convert me?
Sure.
Right. Or is the focus of the relationship trying to resolve this difference?
Right.
Is it a difference that we can talk about and live with, or does it become a sort of point of contention?
Right.
Right. Because I've asked myself those sort of questions, right? What point would I be willing to attend Sunday services?
Sure.
To date somebody that, can I be there? Could I support them in that way?
But do you feel like that would be a necessity in the relationship?
I don't know. I think it would depend.
Like you wouldn't expect them to go to drum practice with you, or band practice with you.
Well, and that would be so here's sort of an interesting sort of side on, like we talk about music. Music's a huge thing to me, right? And I know not everybody's going to like the kind of music that I do, and it's progressive rock, metal, odd time signatures, crazy stuff that I like. It's just not for everybody, right?
Sure.
So when I think about part of what I want in a relationship is sort of the shared experience piece, right? And I know that I can't be everything for another person. I don't necessarily expect them to be everything to me. So what I would like would be in part for that person to accept and understand why something means so much to me. I wouldn't necessarily ask them to go to a concert with me and sit and listen to it. They don't have to get in a car and that's what they listen to because that's what I listen to. Right? Same sort of thing. But it is important to me that they kind of understand and appreciate why it's important to me. And so if we carry that sort of into the religious, sort of phase as well, there's part of me that would feel like if that's such a big part of their life, then I would want, I think I would want to sort of to share in that, to support in that. I don't know if that means going to church with them every Sunday. I don't. I mean,
Well, you brought up an interesting aspect of that, which I hadn't really thought about, but it's certainly relevant. Is the shared experience aspect of it? You know, if we do differ on some core things, you know, it's great that we enjoy hanging out together. But if you're constantly off doing your thing and they're constantly off doing their thing, and we're not really having, you know, a ton of shared experiences that we both feel good about and are fulfilled in participating in that kind of stuff, then that may diminish. You know, so that could be. You know,
it depends. So, you know, I'm old enough. I've learned enough and grown enough that there is no one size fits all.
right.
Right. Different. You know, different people. Some things work for people that wouldn't work for me. I have friends in relationships where they don't necessarily share a whole lot of overlap. The relationship still works for them, and that's great. I had a friend years ago. She and I were hanging out. We always would talk about two friends of hers that were in a relationship. They were married, but they didn't live together. No, they each had their own home. They did their own thing, and at the time, she and I, my friend and I, were kind of like, how the hell? I mean, how do you fucking do that? That just seems weird. Their relationship's not going to last. Well, fast forward now, here we are. Last time I talked to her, those friends are going strong.
No way.
They carved out something that worked for them.
Right.
And this is the piece. And so it's kind of like, and then I've read articles where that's kind of like becoming more of a thing with, as people get older, they maintain certain households and things like that. And so I think in me, part of what I try to cultivate is this sort of idea of, I don't have I've got a framework, I think, for things that I'm interested in. And they're, you know, I'm trying to figure out sort of, okay, where are lines for me in terms of things that I can live with this or I can't live with that. Right. You know, and so, you know, having someone with radically, or not radically, but just very different interests, right? You know, whether it's sports or movies or things like that. I think, you know, knowing that, you know, if they find fulfillment in it, sometimes that works better with them going to do it with friends. I can be supportive of that. You know, and I don't necessarily have to partake in that, but if she, you know, she wants me to, then, you know, I can.
Yeah.
Part of what frankly, part of what I struggle with going to church is, or the idea of sort of getting back into a church is I just don't like the thought of sitting in a pew for an hour. I'm kind of over that in my life. I have a hard time sitting through conference calls. Right. Or I don't know, maybe if I've got like onset ADHD, I don't mean to make fun of that in particular, but there are times that I wonder, I'm like going, dude, I would like struggle so much sitting, you know, now it's the part where we sing. Really? If I'm not playing, I don't want to, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. I don't want to go every week and be lectured to.
Yeah.
I'm over the, you know?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, one of the ways that I think about that is just how I expend energy at work. I put so much energy at work into conversation with people, the way I approach communication and things like that. That sometimes at the end of the day of work, it's like, I don't want to be
spent.
You don't have a lot of words left.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't want to, you know, or sort of, we talk about sort of like anger management and things like that. You know, I sometimes play video games and I get really frustrated by the video games. And I came to realize that that's not just because I'm like, I have anger management skills or whatever like that. And it's stupid getting frustrated. And it's like, you know what? There are times at work where I bottle up that frustration that I feel with other people doing stupid things.
Yeah.
Right. Where you go, I'm going to put on that face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to put on that poker face. I'm going to be, I think of it as sort of political and nuanced in the way I try and deal with things, because to do otherwise is counterproductive. Right. And go back to the talks about communication. And it's pretty important for me to figure out how somebody likes to communicate and meet them where they are.
Yeah.
Right. So oftentimes there'll be times at the end of the day where I've like done that in so many meetings or so many phone calls where I've worn that particular sort of suit that at the end of the day, I'm like, I got no more energy to be polite.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I got no more energy to kind of be, you know, political or nuanced or like that. I just am. You know?
Right.
So,
Or you feel that rage during the day and you're like, I can't act on it right now, but tonight I'm going to get so many extra Fortnite kills. I'm going to be so ruthless
I am
tonight.
going to shit on that teenage kid who thinks he's a better Fortnite player than I am.
well, the frustration comes in because they're 13 and it's a young person's thing, and I'm old and slow. My reaction time is just not, So
So I've been out of the dating scene for
Yeah.
a long time, but to give you a little bit of hope, me and my wife have been married.
it's the hope that kills.
I know, right? Me and my wife have been married for 25 years,
Yeah.
right? And so we were young when we got married, and in that time, we've both grown and changed, and now we're at a place where we don't align exactly on various things. I mean, our political views are not lockstep. I'm probably a little bit more left than she is. Our religious views are not lockstep. I'm more of the anti-theist. I'm not just an atheist, but I'm I'm vocal and outspoken, and I think most religious views do real harm, and she's more of just kind of the lighthearted agnostic. If you want to believe, fantastic, you do you, and let's just love each other. The big thing is that we both really appreciate the other person for who they are, and we value them for the person that they are, aside from their politics or their religion or their that kind of thing. So we have differences, but it leads to some really interesting conversations. We start off every morning with okay, let's get into it. How are we? And that's how I start my days.
Now, I will say one thing that comes to my mind here, of course, talking about dating in a religious or a secular space, been married for a while, was married for a while, divorced amicably and all, I've been single, for a long freaking time, all of that. One thing that keeps coming up for me, and I think we have a really interesting opportunity here to talk about it, is the whole concept of masculinity in general. What we as men are supposed to be projecting out into the world, what we're supposed to be feeling internally, and kind of how that is changed, how that is. I can say from both of your perspectives, right, about how you view partnerships, how you view that relationship with the other person. I can think of probably 6 or 7 different young male role models right now that would say you two are a bunch of bitches in your relationship getting walked over by your women because you don't bring the hammer down. You're not controlling your household. Why is that? Is that something that you think about? Is that something that matters to you? Why are they wrong? All of that shit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me in the least. I feel like those are that's basic bro shit. And
basic bro shit. I love it.
And I really don't think very many people at all are interested in basic bros.
There's a growing trend, man. I mean, there are these people right now who are. I've heard this phrase, and I think both of you might have heard this too. That there is a crisis in young masculinity right now. I've heard this time and time again. Is that not something we need to pay more attention to? Should we teach our men to be stronger, to not cry, to control their household?
I think we should teach them to be real and authentic and vulnerable. I mean, now look, at the same time, I don't think that somebody once told me a real warrior is somebody who's capable of a lot of destruction, but then chooses not to. It's the picture of the it's the picture of the soldier holding a baby. I think that is masculinity. In terms of I could wreck a lot of shit if I wanted to, and I intentionally choose not to. I choose to care about the people that are around me. I want them to have a good experience. I want to protect them at any moment, if need be. So I want to be capable of doing those things, but I don't ever want them to be in fear of me. I want them to feel safe and secure anytime that they're around me. To me, that's masculinity.
Yeah.
When you support and protect those that are around you instead of controlling them.
That vulnerability is how you are able to project that strength. It
Right.
almost sounds
I
like,
want them to be totally free to be themselves.
yeah,
Because if anybody else messes with them, they know they've got me
yeah.
that can step in.
How does that resonate with you?
It does. It does to me. I never the alpha male bullshit is just I don't know, and I'm sure that I would be thrown under the bus for not being an alpha male, and I don't give a fuck. I think part of it is, so when I think about my kids, the things that I wanted for my kids, I think it kind of comes down to sort of a controlling. Is it more important to you that people fit into your worldview, or is it more important that people get to be who they are? All right. What I want more than anything for my kids, I have a daughter and I have a son. I want them to figure out their place, and I want them to be the best versions of themselves they can be.
Yeah.
And there's, I struggle sometimes a bit with sort of what may sound like, corporate or therapeutic sort of language or things like that. I think in the same sort of thing about, I think about women that I've been interested in my life, and women that I've worked for. I've been fortunate enough to work for an amazing woman as that was my boss for 11 years. And the things that sort of she did for me to help me become a better person, my work for supporting in her, it kind of comes down to this sort of respect and wanting somebody to be who and what they want to be. Right. And if your idea of masculinity is sort of subjugating other people, right, your idea of the woman that fawns all over, well, that's a great sort of sexual fantasy role play, or however you want to say that. But if that's how you think you got to live your life, that they've got to bow to your every whim, I don't think much of that.
Yeah.
I don't think much of that is whether it's just masculine or even feminine or anything like that. If you live your life with the idea that other people have to change or do whatever to accommodate your particular worldview, I don't think much of that.
Right.
I
Right.
find that so interesting what both of you have said there, because I very much heard this, something that, again, I think is truly counter to what the current narrative is for the young men that are out there. It is very much more of when you walk into the room, you fucking control it.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. Nothing happens in that room that isn't your fucking say, because you the boss.
That's funny.
And what y'all are saying is the exact opposite. In fact, it is this. Where you see this masculinity coming from is much more about purposefully opening up this space and providing this room for people to actually be able to grow into it, as opposed to just shutting them down.
Right.
That is really fascinating. It's very, very counter, I think.
Here's I guess this is kind of interesting too. In this is I think about, I dated a woman for a while that has a PhD, right? And we talked, and when we were talking about prior experiences dating and things like that, she actually, when filling out her online profile, would debate whether or not she wanted to include that she had a PhD or not, because some guys just couldn't handle the fact that she was so smart.
Yeah.
And I thought, how much fucking, I was just mind-boggling, right? It's mind-boggling that would be something she'd have to consider. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the reality is that she gets to a point where, hey, if you can't handle that I have a PhD, you're probably not the guy I'm interested in anyway.
Yeah.
Right? But I kind of think about that, where it's just, and this is one of the things that I think about sort of at work, right? I feel very fortunate enough that the people I've worked with now for a number of years, we have our ups, we have our downs. Some I like more than I like others. I figured out how to work with all of them. And here's the other thing too. As a general rule within that group, my success doesn't have to come at your expense.
Right.
Gary achieving something fantastic doesn't mean I suck.
Yeah.
Right.
right? It doesn't matter. And if I can help you get there, that's great. If I have to give a little to help you get there, that's great too, because rising tide, all boats, the success of our group, our company, whatever, is better for all of us. Now, sometimes things happen where people lose out, where you may win a promotion that I wanted, but I didn't get. Those things suck. That is, but as a general rule, and this I think is sort of core at a lot of problems we see in society today with like equal rights and DEI and things like that is my success has to come at your loss. Winners, losers, fuck it all. Right. If I don't get it, you're taking it from me or whatever, where it's just, it seems like there's a better way where we can be successful. And I think that sort of comes into sort of what we're talking about with this sort of toxic masculinity, the dating thing, this alpha bro, fucking whatever you want to call it today, where it's like, in order for me to feel good about myself as a man, you must be lesser than me.
Absolutely.
And I don't. You know what I think? I'm going to shamelessly plug myself here for other people. So, just go on my dating profile. I meet a woman that's got a PhD. That tells me that she spent a whole lot of fucking time and energy on something that she's passionate about. And that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I may not know about it. I may not even be able to understand it. She may be talking in a language that I just don't understand about it. I still think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I just do.
Right.
So this idea that in order for me to feel good about myself, you got to be less than me
that is undeniably, again, something I very much feel is a standard line that is being taught right now to young men, that when you are out there playing the game, it is not enough for you to just score.
Yeah.
It is not enough for you to just win, right? You have to make sure that every other person's ankles are broken in the process. You have to go out there and show people that not a damn one of you could ever be this good. I mean, and I see that projected in so many different spaces. And I am always so fascinated by the individuals like you guys that, again, are able to project a lot of what I think people consider the standard, stereotypical male attitude and behavior and so forth, and yet be completely on the opposite side from what these people are out there telling us.
Yeah.
As a young man, this is what I need to be. As a 30-something single dude, this is how I've got to behave. And it is demonstrated regularly from you two. It's like, hey, no, there is a completely opposite way to do this.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's better.
Right. I mean, I'm not impressed if somebody had a long list of people that they've dominated or controlled or situations that they've, mandated and that kind of stuff. I'm very unimpressed by that. Tell me about the people that you've helped. Tell me about people that were more in need than you, weaker than you, that you have, tell me about the hands down that you've given and lifted some people. That's impressive to me. Much more so than rooms that you've dominated. That to me strikes me just more of a dick move than anything else. I mean, and to me it seems like a weakness that somebody has given into that and let that aspect of themselves make its way to the forefront. And they strike me as more cowardly because they haven't allowed their vulnerability and their weaknesses and the things that make them cry. Before we started recording today, Chris and I were sitting here talking about the things that choke us up, and the things that make us cry easily, the things that really get us in just a moment when sometimes we're not even expecting it. And next thing we feel our chin wobbling and, but I think that shows a stronger personality and a deeper character.
I just want to state it for the record. I don't cry
Never once. Haven't happened.
at Pixar movies or at Ted Lasso clips.
Yeah, right,
Or at
right.
anything my kids
Right.
do.
There is not, trust me, there is not a certain scene in that movie with Sean Penn, I Am Sam, that you could just literally turn it on and 30 seconds later I'll be bawling. That does not exist. That is not real.
I can't watch my daughter play in a concert without getting choked up. My daughter plays upright bass and bass guitar.
That's awesome.
We went to London back at the beginning of this year because the WKU band got invited to take part in a parade. I had to watch my daughter play bass in a concert in Cadogan Hall in London, and I just was so proud.
How could you not?
I just was like, so, but I was thinking about, so I was going back to something you said. I'm thinking to sort of part of this sort of this need to sort of feel control, this sort of need to not show vulnerability. I think of myself as a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated learning new things, right? One of the things that I find consistently is the more I learn about any given subject, the more I realize that I really don't know.
Yeah.
Right? The ability to go deep on any subject, the idea of sort of expertise, is sort of fascinating to me. And there's just so much I don't know, right? Part of the way I think about work, quite frankly, I think one of the things that is sort of a key aspect of sort of the work that I do and the people that I manage is, let's talk about what we want to do. Let's get the smart people in the room looking at it. And then part of my job is to get out of their way.
Right.
Right. And in order to do that, there's a couple of key things I have to do. I have to be okay with not being the smartest person in the room.
Right.
I have to be okay with, hey, on this particular topic, this person, man, woman, child, whatever, knows more about it than I do. And if I just shut up, I could probably learn a thing or two from them. Right. And so it's there in sort of that masculinity that we're kind of talking about here. Part of that is sort of the need to sort of establish yourself as the best or the most knowledgeable, and a lack of willingness to tolerate differences or to acknowledge that maybe somebody knows something more than you do is sort of just astounding. Like, how can you ever just assume that, Are you a PhD? Have you been doing this for a long time? Have you really gotten into it? Then you probably be the smartest person in the room. I'll give that to you. Right. Yeah. You can tell me everything you know, right? But this idea that, any sort of idea anywhere, like, oh, I saw a couple of videos on YouTube and now I'm of course. I know everything there is to know about infectious diseases. Oh, Jesus Christ.
But like getting back to that line, the thing you had about, kind of being the most badass in the room and all that kind of stuff, in terms of a company, if you're the smartest guy in the room, then you've been doing a poor job hiring. The best thing you can do is find people that are way smarter than you and find a way to get them on board and then get out of their way.
Love that.
And then equip those people and listen to those people when they say, hey, this is what we need. We need this. Then you're a facilitator.
Love that.
But that's more leadership than you being the most badass one in the room. You're going to cripple yourself and you're going to hinder yourself if you take that.
It's it's that recognition and the wide-eyed looking at the vulnerabilities that we have and being comfortable with that and being comfortable to showcase that to others.
Yeah.
That is where strength really comes from. That's what I'm getting from both of you. And I think that's amazing. And I know I've showed you this spoken word poem, the We Are the Lions. That's one of my favorite ones. And I know you love poetry, so I love to bring, but you said something there just a minute ago about how, truly that hardcore control, that I'm the biggest badass in the room, that behavior is cowardly. And there's a line in that poem, and I might get it wrong, but it goes like, to prove we are lions, we become sheep.
Yeah.
To prove that we are strong, we become weak. And I think that is such a powerful realization, is that when you are behaving in that manner, that typical alpha bro type bullshit, when you are doing that, you are really, at the end of the day, cutting your own self off at the knees. You are harming yourself, you are harming others, and it will not get you to the place that you want to go.
Right.
That's amazing.